Hello, everyone. I'm Megan Scheider. I'm a partner in Husch Blackwell's Technology, Manufacturing, and Transportation Unit. I'm also the co-leader of the firm's artificial intelligence team. We are delighted to welcome so many members of our alumni community to today's program. On the alumni network front, we have the following activities on the horizon. Be on the lookout for our fall alumni newsletter to hit inboxes in October. We'll also have one more Alumni Academy webinar this year. So in the survey for today's program, if you would be sure to let us know what topics you'd like to hear more about, that would be great. If your preferred email address for our HB Communications has changed, please add your new email in the survey as well. For our DC office alumni, we are hosting in-person events this fall. Contact Stephanie Dorsum for more information on that. And for any alum in the St. Louis area or who is willing to travel to the St. Louis area, we are hosting an in-person AICLE in our St. Louis office this November. So watch for an invitation to that event as well. Before we begin our content, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application icons for you to use during the program today. If you have any questions during the webcast, please submit it via that question box there, and we will try to answer all questions. But if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. All of the materials for this presentation are available in the Programs Materials folder. And as you saw in the intro slides, if you were logged in, this program has been approved for legal education hours. To report your hours, click on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen, and a certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with a recording of the webcast for watching and sharing. To get started, joining me today is Tom Hutchison. Tom is our firm's Director of Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. Tom joined Husch Blackwell in 2020 at the beginning of the firm's efforts to become truly data-driven. During his tenure, he's grown our team and capabilities to deliver solutions to complex data and AI problems for the firm's staff, attorney, and clients. Tom holds a master's in applied mathematics and the world's only bachelor's degree in mathematical aesthetics, which is an interdisciplinary triple major in graphic design, philosophy, and applied math. So with those impressive credentials listed off for Tom, I'm going to turn it over to him to get us started.
All right, thank you, Megan. And it's not that impressive because really they were just trying to get me to graduate. They were like, will you please quit taking classes and just get a degree? Come on, man. So I want to talk to everyone today about AI. And so we're going to begin with a little bit of an introduction to AI so that you can get a good intuition of exactly how AI works and what's really going on under the hood, because it's tricky and unfortunately it's a little counterintuitive. So what is artificial intelligence, right? Let's just kind of start with the basic definition. And it's that AI is really a broad field of mathematics and computer science. It encompasses everything from natural language processing, computer vision, robotics, expert systems, planning and scheduling, game playing even, and even more esoteric topics like machine consciousness and things of that nature. The part of artificial intelligence, the subfield that all of the work that we're doing, all of the really exciting stuff that we hear every day, about like ChatGPT and generative AI, that's taking place in the subfield called machine learning. And really that's, something that we've always said, oh, it's machine learning, it's not AI. AI is a big field. But turns out it was decided for us, AI and machine learning are the same thing. So if you hear me say machine learning, that's just from 20 years of calling it that. But AI and machine learning for our processes are the exact same thing. So if you hear me say one, they're interchangeable and we're good to go. So what is it though, really? So when we talk about AI, really the key thing that we're talking about here is that it's some computer code that's doing some really witty math that uses probability, that is able to find patterns and work with those patterns. And we give it a whole lot of data, we call it training data, and we let the model learn on that data and it finds those patterns. And so once we've got some code that's figured that out, we just refer to it as a model because that's just an easy shorthand to go with. And an AI model could be something as simple as, just like a trend line in Excel. That's a basic linear regression, which is the core of machine learning. Or it could be something as complex as ChatGPT or CoCounsel. But really, ultimately, when we say a model, we're just talking about some computer code that's, found an approximate solution to the training data. And that's really, really, really important to understand, because AI can only be an approximate solution. It's never going to be able to give you an exact solution. And some way to think about that is if you think about like a digital picture you've taken with your phone camera, it looks like a really good representation of say the room you're in, or the sunset, or the cloud, or your dog. But when you zoom in on it, you start, you see pixels, and eventually you zoom in and it doesn't look like the real thing at all. It's a very good approximation, but it's still an approximation. And the way that works when we have data is, we'll start with some data here. And this could be, like sweater sales over the year or whatever. But we have a whole lot of values. And the key thing is that if we look on this bottom axis down here, we have a value that we know. And then we have, the value we want to predict. So for example, if we put in the number 5 to the model, what would the AI model tell us is the solution? Well, when we take this data and we feed it into a machine learning system and we generate a model, we wind up with this line. So that line is what the model has learned. But this is the most important thing to really, truly understand about AI, is that when we look at this, we can see that there's a whole lot of spread, right? If we look at 5 and we look up, we see the line, we see a whole lot of spread around it. But the model doesn't know that. Everything from this data has been incorporated into this line. That's everything that the model has learned right there. And that's everything that it knows. So that if we give it, the number 6, it's going to return the value of 1352. So the value we know is 6, and then it predicts that the answer is 1352. It doesn't have any of the knowledge that goes along with all these lines or all of the spread. That's all been baked in as best as it can into that line. And this is the only thing that the model knows. And that's why oftentimes we'll think, oh, this thing, it's close, but it just doesn't seem to understand this, or maybe it's given us a wrong answer, or maybe it says something weird. It's because it's only giving you an approximate solution, because that's the best it can ever do. And again, those approximate solutions, like a digital photo, it can be pretty good, but it's never going to be perfect. But we can see that value, that 6, it's right there in the center. It's a pretty good estimate. It could have been a lot higher, it could have been a lot lower, but this is a good approximate answer. And so always think about that when you're talking about any kind of AI solution. Maybe it's generative AI, maybe it's something else. It's only going to be an approximate solution. It can be close, but it's never going to be perfect. So let's talk about generative AI. Because generative AI is really the reason that we're here today, because this is one of the most exciting things that's happened in the history of computer science, honestly. Generative AI is able to learn human language by finding structures and patterns inside huge amounts of text. And so what we do is we take massive, massive numbers of documents, and we take the text out of them and we convert them into numbers. And we call those numbers tokens. And what those tokens are is it's a way to break up the text so that the machine can understand it. So these models never, ever, ever see any text. They only learn language from seeing the numbers. They find the patterns in the numbers. They never, ever see the text. And so that's why when we say, oh, this model's making things up, or it's lying, or it's hallucinating, really all it's doing is it doesn't know anything about the real world. It doesn't know anything about anything. It only knows these numbers and these patterns that it's found in it. So when it finds those patterns, it essentially has kind of a set of building blocks like Legos that it can use to create new things. And that's the generative part of generative AI. It learns these patterns inside of the language, and then it figures, okay, these are these patterns, and it can use those patterns and those chunks like Legos to build and create responsive. And so we call those models large language models, or LLMs. And we call them large language models because internally they are huge and highly complex and based off of massive amounts of language. But again, it's an approximate picture of human language is a good way to understand how these systems work and why sometimes they'll say things that can seem kind of nonsensical. So here's an example of how these tokens work. This is actually GPT-4's tokenizer. And so we can see this sentence here at the top, And in this middle one, it's color coded into the chunks that are considered tokens. So we can see that like generative actually breaks into two different tokens, so gener and additive. And those two Legos can be used to make lots of different words and lots of different chunks. And at the bottom, those are the raw numbers that the model works with. So keep in mind that these models have never seen language. The only thing they've seen are numbers. And those numbers are based on language. And the model is actually able to understand and represent human language and find patterns in it by just looking at those numbers. So it creates those little Legos, right? So you can add up those concepts, and it can internally, build thought and sentences out of these Legos. So this is kind of a neat example. If you take the term sushi inside of GPT-4, it has a lot of components inside of it. It's built out of lots of those little Legos. And one of those Legos is Japan. And so if you remove the Japan Lego from sushi and add Germany to it, you get essentially bratwurst. And that's true. That really happens with the mathematics inside of these. And the reason for that is that sushi represents food item and it has a national identity. When you remove the national identity of Japan and add in a different national identity, you get the national identity food item for Germany, which is bratwurst, according to these models. So that's what it's figured out. And that works across language. You can take many concepts and swap out chunks of them internally. And this was one of the first things that was discovered about these models, and something that's still an area of research, is the way that semantic meaning is bundled up into these chunks of numbers. It's really fascinating stuff. It's really interesting. But that's the reason that sometimes we get weird results out of these things. And it's also the reason that these things are so powerful, is they have a deep internal understanding of how language works. So the model learns a representation of the world, based off of the language that it's seen. It's never seen a single written word. And one final interesting point is that researchers aren't really sure exactly how this process works. We know how to build these things. We know how to feed them data, but we're not exactly sure why, when you give them more and more and more data, they continue to get smarter and smarter. We actually don't know. It's fascinating stuff. But let's talk about leveraging generative AI, because that's what we're here for. That's what we want to do. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some examples and show you some things that these models can do, and give you some examples of ways that we've used them in our practice here at Husch to really bring a lot of value to the firm and to clients. So this is one of the coolest things in my mind. It's something we're doing a lot of work with right now, is that large language models can be trained. They understand language, but they can also be attached to models that can understand vision. And what's really exciting about that is you can then take a vision model that can transcribe text, and the language part of the model can apply what it knows about language to make things understandable. So, some of the challenges we've had, especially in real estate, have been we have these old microfilms of old deeds that are written in this beautiful, perfect script, and it's really hard to read. And so you can see that, you can kind of make sense out of it, but this would take a long time to transcribe. Now, if we used traditional OCR results, so OCR is optical character recognition. It's an older machine learning technique that can be used to recognize words. When we feed, this image into a system like that, it's clear that it sees like this 420 here, and it says H20, and it kind of goes off into the weeds here. It doesn't really understand what it's seeing. But with an LLM, it can understand that if we're saying right here in book 420, page 179 is what it saw, that it really is able to look at this and say, oh, okay, well, it says book, and there's what looks like this thing could be H20, but since it's book, it's probably 420. It's using the surrounding context to understand exactly what it's seeing. So it looks at all of the words on screen and it says, do these match? Do these make sense? And it keeps iterating until it gets there and it figures it out. This is a really good transcription of what we're seeing right here. And this is another example, same document. It's interesting to look at this because you can see that there is, up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see that there is a curly brace right here. And the model in the second lines were State of Missouri and County of St. Louis. It said, oh, that's a curly brace. And it didn't have any way to represent just like a giant curly brace because it can only return text. So it returned one on each line. And so there's spatial understanding going on here along with language. This is an incredibly useful technique. We've used these kind of tools to do automated contract segmentation. So, you often will get a lot of different clauses in a contract. In this case, we've got Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Maine, and, you want to break it apart. So we've got tools that we've used that where the AI could go in and understand, oh, this is a section that's only about Florida. This is a section that's only about Nevada. And so it's able to pull that out, and we're able to work with those separately. The other neat thing about that is that you can even blend those together. You might have a part of a document that has Georgia, Illinois, Maine, and then goes back and has something else about Georgia. We do see that kind of stuff often. It can actually segment, extract, and order those and find them in place, which is incredibly useful. Anytime you're going through, a pleading or a large contract, there could be lots of information interleaved, and especially if you've got kind of a funky scanned PDF, it can be really hard to work with. But, by doing this, we're able to save hundreds and hundreds of hours on contract segmentation and working with these tools. We've saved a lot more than 400 since this slide was created. It's amazing what you can do with these. Another really cool thing that you can do is that if you can tell the model, hey, there's going to be this right here and this right here and this right here, it can actually take regular forms and extract data from them instantly all day long. It's amazing. So our education PSC had to process 1,700 student loan documents. And they were all, regular, right? Except they had handwriting on them and checkboxes and whatnot. But you could say, okay, this part will be the first name. This part will be the middle name. This checkbox tells us if you're a parent filling this out. You get all the information right there. And so you can take some examples, hand it to the model and say, hey, this is this is that. And I want you to pull these out and do all that. So it can then focus on exactly what it needs and convert a handwritten form into a set of very specific digital pieces of information, which is super handy. This approach has, again, saved way more than 1,200 hours since the creation of this slide, but massive amounts of a time saving, massive streamlining by just using these tools to be able to effectively pull data out of a very chaotic form. So one of the things with handwriting is that sometimes you get some really funky stuff. And so what we see here is a prompt and the actual results that came out of it by feeding this data into it. And you can see that it actually does a pretty good job of creating this table. And literally the only instructions the system was given is, this is a time card, create a table of the data that is found on it, and then a picture of the time card. And it created a pretty good table. But you can see we've highlighted, there's like a little mistake right there, and there's some things that don't quite jive the way we would want it to. And the reason for that is that you're handing it a whole lot of information in that one image. So we use some really neat computer vision tools, specifically a technique that's called edge detection, which lets us find lines and edges and corners and shapes inside of a document. And you can see here what we've done is we've said, okay, do some edge detection on this and find me all of the edges. We can then, using similar technique, say, okay, this is where we want to break it up. And then we can automatically split up documents into these chunks. And the really fantastic thing about those chunks is that then they're smaller, they're more condensed, and you can feed them into the system and get a more focused piece of information, which means you'll get higher quality results out of it. So by combining traditional techniques and these new techniques, we're able to really do some amazing stuff with handwritten documents and various contracts and highly complex documents. So we have a tool that we built that my team's developed here at the firm called Prompt Composer. And what's really neat about Prompt Composer is that it's kind of like ChatGPT, except it's one of the only versions in the world that actually uses multiple models. And so you're able to use, for example, GPT-4o from OpenAI. You can use the Anthropic models, and there are other models that can plug into it, meaning that we're able to tune and get the best possible results out of these. So one of the things that we were able to do is, we had all of these activities that were across tons of matters, and we needed to do narrative analysis on them and coordinate with several attorneys. It just takes forever to do. So we were able to take all of this data, feed it into Prompt Composer, and just to simply say, okay, this is what we want to do. This is what we're looking for. And, the approach can save, right here, we're saving 22 hours per month. We built, systems like this and solve problems like this across the firm, and we're saving so much time. And the cool thing about that is that it improves the results. So you're able to get more done, you're able to get better results, And that allows you to focus on, the actual practice and getting the client the best possible result with their matter every time. And so these tools are really fantastic in that space. So document translation is another thing that is just, fascinating. And the reason for that is that large language models, because they are able to understand the structure of language, they essentially, you can imagine that they have a drawing of what language looks like to them in their heads. And the thing is that those languages, those human languages, are actually all very similar and structured almost the same. So it's essentially like if you had the directions to leave your hotel room in Denver, go to the coffee shop, go to the train station, get on the train, go somewhere in town, and go to a meeting. And you had those instructions, and they were like, go downstairs, make a left, make a right, do this. And you took those instructions and then could use them in Tokyo, or it could use them in Germany, or it could, use them in Spain. Those instructions will work across any language. And that's what's really cool about the way that these systems work, is that large language models are able to translate text across documents. And because they understand what the document looks like, we're able to take a document in one language, for example, in Spanish, convert it into English or into, another language entirely, and overlay it in the same way, so that we can essentially take a document that is written in one language and recreate it in another language in extremely, extremely fast. And that's something that has been a deep challenge for a long time, and it's something that these models excel at. Just one example saved 8 hours, just doing one. And you can imagine how often these techniques get used. It's really fascinating and exciting stuff. This is one that I think is really fascinating, and that is a great use of these models' abilities to understand context. So we built a tool that allows us to take any kind of an audio file and feed it into the model, and it will transcribe it in very, very, very rapidly. And we got this ask that essentially opposing counsel had dropped 400 voicemails on us, and we needed to make a decision by the next day whether we were going to admit all of them, admit some of them, try to extend discovery. What are we going to do? We're going to have to deal with these. So my team was able to take all 400 of these voicemails, rapidly transcribe them using large language models, and then take the text out of those, run it through another model, and say, what's the content here? What's going on? And so, some of those were like, a voicemail about like, oh, hey, I got to go pick up the dog. And some of them were material to the case. What we were able to do in just a few hours was to take all of these voicemails, determine which ones were material to the case and which ones should actually be admitted, and respond with that. The opposing counsel did not have that tech. They didn't have the ability to do it. They were just shooting for some malicious compliance and essentially saying, here's 400, you're going to have to extend discovery. Oh, bummer. And we were able to turn around and be like, no, we'll just admit these. And so using AI actually allowed us to craft a legal strategy and to execute on it in a way that that opposing counsel was completely unable to do so, which is really exciting stuff. And the fact is that this was a project that was just kind of like, oh, we'll see what we can do. We turned it over in a few hours, and it was so straightforward. It's unbelievable the impact that just a couple hours of work was able to have with that, and something that would have just been impossible in the past. And one more, this is kind of a neat one that I think is great, is that because these models can both write code, they understand computer code very well and can write code for you, and they can also understand images very well. We had a problem come up where we needed to produce a visualization for a client presentation, and it needed to be done really fast. It needed to be turned over that day. So going from starting with a visualization, to writing the code, to tuning it, to revising it, to drafting it, to turning it into a production quality graphic, usually takes about 12 to 15 hours of work because of the complexity involved. With this one, we had a screenshot of data and some basic description of what we wanted this to look like, and we needed to produce it in just a few hours. So what we did is my team got together and said, okay, here's some ideas I've got. We just drew our ideas, and you can see on the right-hand side there, that's actually my drawing of this plot. That's what I fed to the machine. And we gave it the data, we gave it a picture of the data, and we gave it a drawing of what we wanted it to look like. And we said, hey, using this programming language that we use to create visualizations, write the code to create this visualization for me. It was able to do it. It was able to give us multiple varieties. So in a couple of hours, we were able to go back to the attorneys and say, okay, here's all of the choices you've got, which direction you want us to go in. And then we were able to refine, develop, and provide, in my opinion, a better graphic than we could have in 12 hours. And we were able to do it very quickly. And this is, just some of the advantage of combining these tools. So don't think of AI and large language models as this is going to do everything. It's not always the solution, but it can often be a part of the solution. And in this case, it was a fantastic part of it. Again and again, we're seeing ways that by being witty, by thinking through these systems, and by having, just good ideas and piecing things together, we're coming up with amazing solutions. And that's really the key to the AI revolution that's undergoing right now, is to have ideas, try things, see what works, and then build on it. So with that, I'm going to pass back over to Megan. I'd like to thank everybody for listening to me today, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Tom. For the rest of our time, we're going to talk about the strategic considerations that organizations face in implementing AI and some of the legal considerations and risks that go along with use of AI at your organization. Your organization is already familiar with the considerations and factors that go into implementing traditional software systems, and you will encounter many of these same issues implementing AI systems within your company. But AI brings to the table dynamics that require a new and different perspective, namely the ability of AI to capture aspects of human decision-making and for that to adapt and change over time. So while the advantages of AI are unlimited, as you heard from Tom at this point, organizations have to deploy that power very thoughtfully and carefully in a way that complements the organization's overall objectives and values. The first consideration is how your organization can even use AI. AI systems can be used to automate human tasks and processes, which perhaps can generate lower cost and higher productivity for your organization. Or AI systems can be used to innovate and create new products or new services. Many organizations are starting their AI journey with tools focused on improving internal efficiency as opposed to externally facing output. A lot of that is around efficiency and productivity by the employees within the company. And that could be anything from email management to crafting correspondence, to data analysis, or to even monitoring worker safety on the factory floor. On the other hand, some common uses of externally facing AI by organizations, especially right now, you're seeing this a lot, you're probably using it and experiencing it a lot, is to talk to customers and clients and improve that experience, whether it's through a chatbot or customized marketing or customized shopping experiences. Another example of externally facing AI usage is in contract management with your vendors and your partners, and procurement and all the transactional components of those relationships. AI can serve to sort of reduce the amount of, for lack of a better phrase, friction points that go along with those sorts of relationships. And then finally, companies are using AI to create and to design and build. Now, most of the companies leading the way with these massive AI capabilities are names that you know and recognize: Google, Microsoft, Amazon, known tech giants. And there are others, but the companies capable of this continuous, constant investment in AI are few. The list is not long. So the reality is that most organizations cannot do this from scratch, and instead will have to build off models that are started and made available by these giants, or even use AI as a service type model in order to implement AI in their organization, as opposed to building it entirely on their own. There are several what I call pillars of implementation for AI at an organization. These are just a few of them. Functionality is one that I think kind of speaks for itself, which is what problem is the company trying to solve? What is the anticipated output? An organization has to understand, to the extent possible, which we'll talk about in a minute, how the system works to even achieve that objective. And data governance is an important part of functionality for reasons that we'll talk about later on as well. With respect to the overall strategy, the AI system, first and foremost, has to be valuable to the business, and it has to be so valuable that it's worth whatever the investment in the AI is, which could be significant. But value can be indirect, and it doesn't have to be, especially in these early days as organizations are just figuring out how to implement AI. There doesn't have to be a direct correlation between the AI and cost savings, for example. In order for it to be valuable, it doesn't have to be that direct. Value can be found in simply preparing the workplace and the employees for an AI-centric environment, because that's where we're headed. Or perhaps value can be found in knowing that your organization is keeping pace with or even exceeding competitors in your space with respect to innovation, and then being able to market that. So, a common piece of advice that you'll hear is start small, start achievable, and build on that. You won't build a culture around AI overnight. And as indicated in these other pillars, creating a culture that is excited about and feels empowered by AI is critical to the success of implementation in your organization. And starting somewhere is far better than not starting at all. With respect to trust and the trust and people pillars of AI implementation, there's so much that goes into that and into those categories that we can't do them justice in this webinar. This is really where the challenge to leadership of the organization comes into play in planning this at the highest level. But the bottom line is that if your employees don't trust the system, they won't use it, or they won't use it effectively, and your investment is potentially wasted. So to earn that trust, employees need to feel that someone or some group in the organization has a really good handle on what's happening with the AI deployment, and that the organization is committed to making specific groups of people responsible for it. Employees also need to feel a sense of control. So the AI and the user need to be able to interact appropriately for whatever the task is at hand. An example is just simply ensuring that the human or the employee has the ability to oversee or correct the outcome or what the AI is doing before it's finalized. So there needs to be tremendous transparency, not just in the AI decision making, but in the organization's communications to the employees about its use of AI and why it's using it and what it hopes to achieve and who it's benefiting. The reason there's an asterisk there by transparency is because here I'm not really talking about, although that this is relevant, I'm not really talking about transparency in the decision making of the AI tool itself. As you've probably learned or are hearing, there are some AI models, such as those involving complex neural networks, that the decision making of AI is very, very challenging, if not impossible to understand. Almost necessarily, those models are not transparent. But that's not really the point of transparency in this context that I'm talking about here. The key to these systems with respect to building trust in your organization is recognizing if those limitations exist and having a plan for auditing and validating the output or the end product of your tool. There are a number of societal considerations that are impacting the speed at which organizations are implementing AI and why some are struggling with it. You'll hear about these same considerations in the regulatory landscape as well. If you are a global company, you might be looking at these issues through several different lenses. A lot of the concerns you see represented on this slide are US-centric, although certainly not all of them. Even from organization to organization, these values may be more or less emphasized or have different meanings. So the takeaway here is that the organization wants the impact of AI on its workers and end users and really society at large to match the values of the organization. And that should be part of the strategic planning that goes on at the company. Building an AI system that is free from error in all of these areas is not possible. But the first step for the organization to achieve responsible AI usage is ensuring that the group responsible for AI implementation is a diverse, multidisciplinary group. And by diversity here, we don't only mean race and gender, although that could matter. We mean diversity in perspectives, diversity in values, in culture, and diversity in skill set. So a simple way to approach these concerns is to start with the question, who is benefiting from this AI system. In addition, your employees may have many concerns about AI usage at the company, including whether it can be trusted to do the job right, whether AI is going to take their job or reduce demand for their skill, or even whether the organization is using AI to track and monitor them, their hours or their performance or their compliance in ways that it wasn't before. On the other hand, employees could be really excited to use AI and get help with certain tasks. The organization has a lot of influence over those concerns and how it frames them. And this goes back to the communication and the transparency piece of creating an AI people-centric culture. So by intentionally focusing on the opportunities available to the employees to do their jobs better and faster, or to better serve clients or make more sales, that should be the goal of the organization and its communications. Companies would be wise to get out in front of these concerns and have very specific plans for and examples of how workers can learn new skills or enhance their existing skill set using AI, and be prepared to provide targeted, intentional support and training for that. That's referred to as reskilling or upskilling. Having that mapped out and in place before a big AI deployment is a good idea. And by doing that, employees are able to add a whole new level of value to the organization, which increases their job security and the opportunities available to them. And you want your employees to be in demand, and you can do that by empowering and encouraging them to be part of the AI culture. In addition to the strategic deployment of AI in a way that meets your company's objectives and values in a responsible way, organizations need to also be mindful of multiple legal considerations and potential risks that accompany the use of AI. We have very few definitive answers in response to these questions, but we know what to watch for. Although I'm sure we'll be surprised along the way, because as you just heard from Tom, this is just the beginning, and we're just at the precipice of what AI can and will do. There is no national regulation of AI at this time. There are federal acts and state laws that prohibit certain things or require certain things that also apply to AI, even if the act or the law or the regulation doesn't say anything about AI. We are starting to see some specific guidance from federal agencies and a few court cases, mostly on the intellectual property side. But this slide reflects the multiple sources of guidance or regulation that could impact an organization's AI usage, and we'll chat about some of them. State and local laws and regulations are in their infancy, at least with respect to AI specific regulations. But we're starting to see some pop up, and there are a number pending. We'll see what happens with all of those ultimately, but there are some that are in place. There are 4 states with enacted legislation surrounding AI-specific usage, and it's all about automated decision-making and algorithmic bias, or both. And then there are dozens of active bills that Husch Blackwell is tracking along those same lines. So we would not be surprised for many states to take an approach like Illinois has taken, that requires transparency in use of AI in video interviews and things like that. New York City requires transparency in audits of AI systems and has very strict requirements for employers who use automated employment decision tools. Maryland has very strict accountability for law enforcement using facial recognition. And then, of course, Colorado just passed very broad consumer protections for AI that include algorithmic bias. So, but as I mentioned, state or local anti-discrimination laws or other laws may be in play and impact your usage, even if they don't talk about AI specifically. Then there are the laws of other countries that could impact US organizations or certainly global organizations. The big example right now, of course, is the EU, which has a detailed act. Now, the EU takes an approach reflected here on this slide, where it classifies AI according to its risk and regulates accordingly. Most of the text of the EU Act is aimed at what they call high-risk AI systems, where unacceptable risks are prohibited altogether. And examples of AI with unacceptable risk include like social scoring systems, which is going to implicate bias, and manipulative AI. And then lesser risk AI systems are subject to less obligations, and minimal risk AI systems are unregulated altogether. An example of a lesser risk system would be like a chatbot, where an example of a minimal risk system is like a spam filter that a company might use. When you are facing compliance with multiple and different laws, it's a good idea to first find the similarities across all of them. And then for the differences, you have different options depending on your risk tolerance and practicalities. You could comply with the strictest of those, or you could evaluate the risk of taking a lesser step or partial compliance. So for the rest of our time, we picked 4 legal areas that we think are the most impacted by AI right now. And we're going to spend a few minutes issue spotting in each of those. And those are data privacy and security, bias and discrimination, intellectual property, and liability issues. With respect to data privacy and security, it's been said that, and this is 100% true, that data is the lifeblood of AI. You heard this morning that you heard just a minute ago that AI doesn't know really anything. It has to learn from what we give it, and it depends entirely on data. And organizations have been grappling with data concerns for a long time. There are dozens and dozens of sources of regulations, laws, and guidance surrounding data privacy that totally predate the Gen AI boom. But that Gen AI boom carries with it enhanced data privacy issues that are now much more challenging than in traditional data processing. And that's because you may have heard it described this way, what people say are the 3 V's: volume, variety, and velocity. That means more data, different types, and exponentially faster processing. So artificial intelligence raises the analysis of personal information to just new levels. There's more of it happening, it's more powerful, and it's faster. So the challenge for legislators is whether and how to take steps that protect individuals from adverse effects of the use of their personal information in AI without unduly hindering AI development. So that's very, very challenging to tackle these issues from a legislative perspective, especially when we don't even know everything that is yet in front of us. All of the sources of privacy laws or guidance reflected on this slide set standards for data protection and grant individuals some level of control over their personal information in some way. So while we're eagerly watching developments in legislation pertaining to AI specifically, all of these things could apply to an AI tool if it uses data in a way implicated by these sources. There is no comprehensive federal privacy law in the US either. There are a number of federal laws that apply to certain sectors like HIPAA, but without a comprehensive federal privacy law in the US, states have been enacting their own consumer protection laws applicable to entities that do business in those states and meet certain requirements. So again, a lot of different sources impacting your organization, especially if you do business at a national or global level. There's also industry standards, there's agency guidance, and then finally, contractual obligations can also impact, obviously, what organizations can do with their data. With respect to state privacy law legislation, efforts are in full force, have been for a while. We have 17 states that have enacted privacy laws and will go into effect in the next few years. This area of law is constantly changing. So it's very important to consider whether the law even applies to you and the differences between the laws that do apply to you. California has the most comprehensive data privacy laws in the United States right now, but there are others that are not far behind it. In terms of the future, there's a tremendous debate over AI policy options for privacy protections and how to approach it. So certain industries really want a cautious industry-specific approach to regulation and are concerned about comprehensive schemes and how a one-size-fits-all approach could unduly interfere with innovation in their space. And we're seeing some of that lobbying, for lack of a better word, from the manufacturing and healthcare industries, for example. In order to understand if your system is in compliance with those laws or guidance, you need to understand these basic ideas about your data. The what is all about what the data is. If you aren't selling or receiving consumer information, these regulations might not apply to you. Does the data contain PII or personal health information? Does it contain attributes about a person that, or demographics that might be sensitive? Is the data anonymized or aggregated? These questions help you determine if your organization and the data at issue in your tool are covered by these laws. The where asks whose data is it? Is it company data only? Are you scraping the internet? Is it being mingled with publicly available data or with another source's non-public data that you have a license to? Is it being shared or disclosed with third parties? Those questions all help address issues of data ownership and notice and consent requirements in the data privacy laws. If you're selling or sharing data, your data subjects may be entitled to notice and the ability to opt out. Knowing when the data is collected and how long it is being retained helps address deletion rights, data minimization requirements, and other data security issues. Knowing why the data is being processed allows organizations to ensure that the purpose aligns with your company objectives and values, but also allows the company to confirm that the data is not being used for an unauthorized purpose. And then finally, how is the data protected? It is common to see requirements for reasonable data security measures in these laws. So not only do these questions need answered for compliance purposes, they need answered and assessed for purposes of entering into contracts with AI service providers. You need to make sure that your data is handled by vendors in the way that you want and expect your data to be handled. There's a different side of data than complying with data privacy obligations, and that is being aware that your organization's information or your clients' or customers' information is not being inadvertently sent out into the world via AI tools that your employees could be using. Publicly available AI programs such as ChatGPT, it doesn't know anything. It relies on internet access. It relies on history of inputs to create the output that you're looking for. So if you put in confidential information in trade secrets, it might share that information to perform for others. When you signed up, this is just an example, but when you sign up for ChatGPT, there's a big disclaimer that says the information may not only be false, but it's also not confidential. So whether you like it or not, your employees are and will continue to use AI. It's very important to have a use policy in your organization, but they will use AI on the slide to bolster their performance. So it's really, really important that you communicate with your employees and train them and encourage them to use it responsibly to protect your business. And of course, we can't leave the data section without mentioning cybersecurity. AI can and will be used to enhance cybersecurity within organizations, but it's a double-edged sword. Some of the fastest groups to hop on the AI bandwagon are cyber criminals. And there are 3 ways that AI will play a role in cybersecurity. One is offensively. AI writes better phishing emails. It can optimize ransomware. It can write malware. It can generate speech and biometric data to gain access. It can do things faster, more complex, and on a bigger scale. And these threats could even eventually impact physical safety the more that we move into AI-based equipment and tools. The other way that AI will play a role in cybersecurity is defensively. AI will 100% help organizations or network defenders differentiate between false alarms, mundane threats, and more significant threats to better deploy your resources and be ready for a real attack. And then finally, companies developing AI or using it in unique ways. I mentioned some of the tech giants earlier. The primary target, they will be targeted by adversaries and criminals. So it will be very interesting to watch how cybersecurity and AI plays out. The next segment we're going to talk about is bias and discrimination. Federal agencies are grappling with how to best approach bias and discrimination in AI and are referring to AI as the new civil rights frontier. The agencies are asking, how can we ensure unbiased decision making, and who should we trust more, humans or machines? There's no question that AI can replicate existing biases, but it's also been shown to help increase diversity in applicant data pools and has the potential, if used correctly, to help root out human biases that can be otherwise very, very hard to overcome. But EEOC guidance has made crystal clear that employer use of AI can violate employment discrimination laws. It's also clear that employers are on the hook for problems caused by AI vendors who create the algorithm. So in other words, AI made me do it is not going to be a defense. Bias occurs when algorithms make decisions that systematically disadvantage certain groups of people, whether that's because of an issue in the data or the humans involved. All data is going to have some bias. It's not malicious or deliberate in the sense that we may think, but AI doesn't have a moral compass. So in pre-existing data sets, there could be bias already baked into the data. Then there are also concerns about how the data is used and whether that will perpetuate or discriminate, even if the data itself is okay. And this has been talked about a lot, and as I'm sure you've seen and read about it, but bias can have disastrous consequences when applied to areas such as healthcare, criminal justice, and credit scoring. Bias does not only occur from preferences or exclusions in training data. It can be introduced by how the data is obtained, how the algorithms are designed, and how the outputs are interpreted. So there's a lot of different ways that bias can find its way into your AI model, and we've seen this already. You've read about Amazon's AI recruiting tool that ultimately ended up showing bias against women, and that was because the data that it was using was a decade old, and it was at a time when a lot of applicants for the roles that they were looking for, which were software developers and tech employees, that was largely men. And the tool taught itself that male candidates were preferable just because of the old data that it was using. We've seen instances of an algorithm identifying individuals from a particular zip code as promising candidates for certain jobs, which of course may end up being a homogenous population that excludes individuals of a certain race or religion. We've seen issues in lending and concerns about perpetuating racial disparities when historic data based on demographics and geography are used. We've seen issues with analyzing speech patterns in interviews could weed out individuals who have speech impediments or hearing impediments or accents that are hard for the computer to understand, and it can discriminate that way. So it's also important, and this is overlooked sometimes, it's important to remember that to the extent you're using AI in your hiring process, you will want to make sure that you're informing job applicants and employees that accommodations are available for individuals with disabilities so that the software or the tool doesn't adversely impact them in a way that you weren't expecting. Following the Biden administration's executive order, which we talked about at the last webinar, if you were on it, federal agencies are taking what they call a whole of government approach to tackling bias and discrimination in AI. This slide reflects the federal agency guidance issued to date. And I realize it's small, fine print is small, but it'll be in your materials. The EEOC has issued technical guidance regarding how the use of AI in assessing job applicants and employees and how that intersects with Title VII and the ADA. The Department of Labor has issued guidance on AI and automated systems in the workplace under the FLSA and other standards. And then the Office of Federal Contract Compliance has issued guidance specifically to federal contractors. We're also watching litigation in this space. I would say the most interesting of which right now is the Workday lawsuit. Workday is a software company used by other companies in the recruiting and hiring space, which is faced with a class action that it uses artificial intelligence tools that discriminate against job applicants at many major companies that it contracts with. And this is probably, I think, one of the first cases to address the legal issues raised by employers' increasing reliance on AI in hiring, which is, should the platform vendor or its users bear the responsibility when facing a bias claim? Workday is, of course, pointing to the users, its clients, and taking the position that it doesn't control how the users operate the software or make decisions. And traditional employment law principles, of course, point to the employer, but there are ways that the employer could look back to the provider under common law theories of liability or the contract itself. So this lawsuit is definitely one to watch. Just recently in July, the court denied a portion of the company's motion to dismiss, leaving open the possibility that the company could be liable for discrimination in hiring, even if it's induced by the platform. So keep an eye on the Workday lawsuit. It may suggest a lot of answers to a lot of our questions. We talked about state and local regulations already, but they are obviously very relevant in the labor and employment space because they're all about automated decision-making and algorithmic bias, or both. Intellectual property and AI. IP questions related to AI are both offensive and defensive, in that your organization could be asking how to protect a trade secret, copyrighted information, or patented information that goes into AI or comes out of it. And your organization could be concerned about violating IP laws in the use of AI. The use of Gen AI presents significant copyright issues. First, while website copy or images can be protected by copyright if they're human created, they cannot be protected if Gen AI creates the content. Use of Gen AI could also expose a company or an individual to claims of copyright infringement. Most of the Gen AI cases that we've seen to date allege copyright infringement by copyright owners naming the companies who design and program the tools, as opposed to naming the end users in these lawsuits. So companies who have custom Gen AI tools might find themselves named as defendants in copyright cases if they used copyrighted materials to train those tools. Trade secret law, as you can probably guess, requires that IP to be a trade secret has to be secret. So if the information claimed to be trade secret was created in whole or in part by Gen AI, it's probably less likely to be considered a trade secret. And if trade secret information is publicly disclosed when it is used to train an AI tool, that could lose trade secret protection. So extreme care should be taken by organizations to protect against the accidental disclosure or inadvertent disclosure of confidential information when using Gen AI. With respect to patent law, just recently this past winter, the United States Patent and Trademark Office issued guidance called Inventorship Guidance for AI-assisted inventions. This is one of the areas where we do have some certainty, and both from the patent office and from the courts, that although the ability to obtain a patent if the inventor used AI during the invention process is not completely foreclosed, the guidance in the law that has come down is reinforcing that only a natural person can be an inventor. So assume that, like with copyright, something generated by Gen AI technology cannot be protected by patent. And I don't believe we've seen any AI lawsuits that have alleged patent infringement yet, and that's simply because the number of patents claiming the use of Gen AI is small. But we'll continue, obviously, to monitor developments in that space. Litigation and liability is my favorite topic. It's a broad topic because I'm a litigator, so it's my favorite. But there are questions surrounding what laws will apply when AI inevitably fails, whether AI causes a car crash or maybe it causes a tremendous business disruption to you. There's going to be a question about who is liable for that damage. And this topic gets more complicated the less and less human there is involved in the action. There are questions surrounding how courts are going to lean into the technology and how experts are going to prove those issues. Presumably, someone will have to prove that whatever happened was the AI's fault, or someone will have to prove that it was not. And in an era of some black box decision making by AI, it will be interesting to see how that plays out. There are questions surrounding to what extent parties to an AI tool allocate liability differently than how it would play out under traditional theories of liability. You all know parties can contract around a lot of laws, but we don't know how the courts will interpret limitations of liability clauses and indemnity provisions in the context of AI. For example, certain allocations of liability may be deemed to be against public policy because of some of the ethical issues involved in AI. So much remains to be seen in that space. But it's reasonable to expect that traditional tort law, at least for now, will apply to these questions, and that absent contractual agreements, if they're enforceable, we're going to have to allocate fault using those traditional tort law theories. But one way to attempt to get a little bit of certainty around these questions is to try to lay it out in a contract if you can. Provisions in contracts between the users of AI with warranties and indemnity provisions, limitations of liability should all be considered. If you're using a free online AI platform, you may not have much negotiating power, but an organization working with a vendor probably has a little more. So one of the most important overall best practices to keep in mind for your organization is and this touches on everything from the bias issue to the IP issue to employees feeling empowered and everything else we've talked about today, is being able to demonstrate your AI's decision-making process in specific ways. So care should be taken in determining whether and when to use certain AI models. As I mentioned, some are easier than others to learn how they've made decisions, and some are more transparent than others. And then in addition, adopting an AI policy that sets out clear guidelines on how AI can and cannot be used at your company is certainly a first step. Perform audits, keep up with the law, keep up with the latest guidance. And then finally, but most importantly, keep humans in the loop always when using AI. So in closing, thank you for joining us today and for being part of Husch Blackwell's History as Valued alums. We hope today was useful to you and that we see you again at future programming. So as a reminder, this program has been approved for legal education hours. To report your hours, click on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen. A certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with a recording of this webcast for watching and sharing. And please, again, be sure to complete our short survey. We use that feedback to plan our future programming, and it's very valuable to us and helps us meet your business needs. This concludes our webinar. Thank you very much for attending.